you Zoomers. My God, isn't this exciting? This is going to be an incredible program tonight. I'm so excited and so anxious to hear Alex Peacock tell us the story of the Bowdoin. It's going to be a terrific thing. This is our 32nd Captain's Quarters, 32nd Captain's Quarters performance tonight on the old Schooner Bowdoin. The second time we've done the Schooner Bowdoin, we did, I think it was program number 3, very in the very beginning of our Captain's Quarters endeavor. Down at the bottom of the screen, you see all these old captains. These are the captains of the Maine Windjammer fleet, the gang that sailed all the schooners out of Camden and Rockland on the coast of Maine. Many of them we've interviewed before, and you'll see them if you go back into the depths of our collection of captain's quarters. We're got a great program for you tonight. It's gonna go on and on and on. We're going to tell you all about this fantastic, this wonderful little vessel, this beautiful little thing called the Schooner Bowdoin. She is not only the official vessel of the state of Maine, she's the flagship for the Maine Maritime Academy. Here's an aerial view of her looking down on her decks. Look at that beautiful hull. Can you imagine anything more picturesque, more just a thing of beauty? This, of course, is when the Academy had her. You can see because there's a rubber boat on deck. Of course, Macmillan never had a rubber boat on deck, but I understand how handy they are and how useful they are. As well as up on the top of the foremast there is the ice barrel. How handy and how useful that was for everybody. I built that ice barrel, and I'm pretty excited to see this picture of it. The old vessel just like a bird going off before the wind. Well, we're going to, as I say, we're going to have this great program tonight. Captain Alec Peacock is going to tell us all about returning to the Arctic with the Bowdoin now. Well, what is it, Alex? 33 times, 34 times the vessel's been up above the Arctic Circle there. This particular vessel, the Schooner Bowdoin, there she is laying, fitting out there. Captain Alex is going to tell us about it, but not yet. As we got this story developing here, people said to me, well, will you tell something about the Bowdoin and the history of the Bowdoin so that we know where to start, where all of this began? And I said, well, yes, I don't really want to steal any thunder from Alec. I'm looking forward to his presentation. But if you want, I'll tell you a little bit about the Bowdoin. I tried to shorten it up. I tried to make darn telephone ring, so right in the middle of everything. I tried to shorten it up, and we'd have a flick about the Bowdoin's history. I should say a flicker. Just I tried to make it short. But my God, the more I got into it, the more enthusiastic I got looking at it. And you just can't tell the history of the Bowdoin in a matter of 5 minutes. So I'm afraid you're going to have to suffer through a little bit more than that. But we'll get back to Captain Alec. Let's go to the Bowdoin right at the beginning. This, of course, is the Bowdoin in the old days in the Arctic. What a sweet little hull that is. Look at that gorgeous cheer. William Hand put that together. And the Bowdoin is a vessel that is handsome from every direction you look at it. Rarely do you get a vessel that you can't criticize one view or the other. This vessel, you got to hand it to it. It's just about perfect every way you look. Beautiful knockabout bow, a nice big foredeck up there, good fore triangle. Of course, they used to have bowsprits on these old vessels, and they realized this vessel being built, the only vessel built for Arctic research in the United States, just for that particular purpose, it couldn't have a bowsprit on it. Bowsprits are too vulnerable. Not only are they widow makers, they wash people off of them when they're trying to furl the jibs out there in a seaway. But in the Arctic, where you're running through ice and things like that, you can't have a bowsprit. They learned that with the F.E. Morrissey and with the Gertrude Thibault. Those vessels had bowsprits and they had bob chains coming down to their stem. You run into ice, and the first thing that parts off is that bobstay, and you lose your bowsprit. And most of them will lose the entire rig. The whole thing will come down in their lap. So they soon put a knockabout bow. That's what they call these vessels without bowsprits. And the Schooner Bowdoin, of course, just about perfect. Short rig, contained rig, and just about perfect for working in the Arctic. The man of the hour, Donald Macmillan. He lived down in Casco. He, of course, went to Bowdoin College. That's the reason for the name of the vessel. Went Bowdoin College. After Bowdoin College, he became a teacher and a counselor. And he had the camp on the islands down there in Casco Bay. Down living in Casco Bay was another guy by the name of Robert Peary. You've probably heard of him. And he was from Eagle Island, Casco Bay. Well, one time, uh, Donald McMillan saved a boy who was drowning in one of the ponds, on one of the islands there. And Robert Peary heard about it and he thought to himself, this is the kind of a guy we need in our expedition. He was planning an expedition in 1909 to plant the flag on the very top of the earth. And they invited McMillan to go along on this expedition. Oh my God, Mac was so excited. He said, "Yes, of course I'll go. Yes, of course." He canceled all his engagements and off they went up to the north, far, far north, to to do this endeavor with the flag on the top of the world, the very first time. Well, he was a neophyte. He let his feet freeze, and when they got up there on the last outstation, he couldn't go across the ice to plant the flag. So Robert Peary said, "All right, you'll have to wait and we'll go without you." But he came back and he had been bitten by the Arctic bug. He was so enthused about becoming an Arctic explorer. The first thing he did was join another company, another expedition to the north. They were headed up to the northern part of Greenland. There was an island in the middle of the ice cap, in the northern ice cap, called Crocker Land. And several explorers had seen it, but they couldn't place it. They hadn't geographically located it. So he joined this expedition, the National Geographic expedition. They went up to way up in Etah, the very top part of Iceland, and dropped him off there in the summertime. He was going to spend the winter, go out over the ice, and do some research on this island. And they could coming back to pick him up the next year. Well, out on the ice they went in the dead of winter. He met the Inuit there, the Eskimos, they called them in those days. And they went out on the ice. They became friendly, and he learned some of their ways. And they looked around, and there was no Crocker Land. There was no island there. It was all a mirage. It was all a crock. So he came back and he was to be picked up the next summer. Well, they had a hard time. The next summer, the vessels couldn't get through. He was there for another year. They had to wait for the rescue vessel for another year. Next year, the rescue vessel had problems. They couldn't get there. The weather was bad again. They had to wait another year, third, and it happened 4 years. Donald McMillan spent with the Inuit in the northern part of Greenland, learning their culture, learning their language, learning how to survive the winters, and learning all about the Arctic, and having plenty of time to think of what he was going to do when he got back to the United States. And he decided he wanted a vessel built for Arctic exploration. So went to Hodgson Brothers down in East Boothbay, and they put together this vessel designed by William Hand, a wooden vessel, beautiful wooden vessel, very heavily, ruggedly constructed, great big apron piece on the inside of the stem there to take care of the bumping into the ice and all that kind of thing, and fitted out for Arctic research. It was a great thing. He got his biologists together, all the men that they needed, and they 1921 they put together the first trip to head north. 1921, they left from Wiscasset. All the people out on the end of the dock there in Wiscasset, enjoying the great goodbyes of the Schooner Bowdoin when she left for her very first trip. They get up there into Baffinland, way up in the very northern reaches, and they found winter quarters in Schooner Harbor there in Baffinland. And there they settled down and let the old winter come, and locked itself in the ice. They banked up snow around the hull to keep warm and built igloos around on deck. You can see the igloos there, and an igloo out on the snow. And this was the very first winter they spent up there. It was quite exciting. They did their biology, they did their research, and spent the winter there learning about how to survive. Of course, the igloos were nice because polar bears were quite active up there. And a polar bear, they tell me, won't enter an igloo. I guess they find it too confining. So this allowed them ventilation in the vessel, but kept the polar bears from coming down, because they sure and the devil would be down in that vessel if you give them a smell of what was cooking in the galley. There's Donald McMillan there, came back from that first very successful trip. And in 1922, they fit the vessel out, turned it around, and he went right straight back up to the north again. Well, he couldn't resist. He went way up to the very upper regions, way above in the northwestern corner there of Greenland, up near Etah. And of course, they ran into some spectacular photographic material there, some absolutely wonderful things. But the weather is so inconsistent up there, and things can turn on you on a dime. And one day they're in a place like this, and everything is absolutely beautiful. And the next minute, the breeze comes up, and they get locked into a corner, and the vessel drags their anchor. And the next thing you know, they're aground in some godforsaken corner. There are no charts. Of course, they're going along all these different places, and nobody's been there before. There's no way to tell where anything is. And it's a kaleidoscope of extremes. The next 2 days later, the sun's out all year, all day and night, the sun's out, and it's just absolutely beautiful. But beware, the next time may be like this. That poor old vessel was aground so many times. There's just uncountable number of times that vessel fetched on a rock. The only way they could see the rock was from maybe that little crow's nest, that little ice barrel up on top of the foremast. If they're looking down and the sun's right, they might be able to see a rock underneath the surface of the water. But for the most part, they couldn't see. They didn't have anything to go by. When they found a rock, he put it on the chart. They were building their chart, building their knowledge all the time with every voyage of the Bowdoin to the north. You can see the Inuit there with their kayaks coming out to see if they can do anything for the old Bowdoin. They had to wait for the tide to come up again. How she did it over and over again is just unbelievable. Here are the scientists that he would take, biologists, zoologists, gemologists, I don't know, sociologists, every ologist you could think of. They would take on the boat and they would take it to the north and study the north and study the psychology of the people and the psychology of the navigation. And navigation was extreme. Here they are again, unloading things off of the vessel, trying to lighten her up so they can get her off of the rock, get out of where they had to find a rock and go up. But it didn't matter. Onward, always onward, up further north they would go. Finally, they got up into way above Etah into a little place called Refuge Harbor. Over those big black headlands there, that's the polar ice cap on top there. This is about the most navigable harbor there is in the northern reaches there. You can't get beyond that because it's all ice cap. They went in here in the summer, plopped their anchor down, and they spent 335 days locked in the ice here in this little harbor. Of course, Mac had been there so many times before, he knew all the Inuit in the area, and they were from Etah and places like that, and they would come and they would join him in Refuge Harbor for a social evening aboard the Bowdoin. Well, of course, come summertime, everybody, springtime, they're all getting ready. The ice is starting to melt. They want to get out of there. So the first thing they do when they get a little clear stretch, they turn the boat around and start to head out to the entrance. Well, the first thing they did, of course, was fetch on a rock. And it was high tide, and the tide started to fall. So they put tackles to the shore from the mastheads to keep the vessel from falling over on her side. It didn't work. The poor old vessel went hove over and over and just yanked those falls right out of the earth. And she fell on her side, down on the port side, and stove in a couple of planks down on that port side. Oh my God. They waited till the tide came up. They unloaded the vessel, hoping that she would rise again. And she did rise again. She came back up, but the tide didn't come up as high as it did when she grounded, and they couldn't get her off that rock. So they put the masthead tackles to her again and hove her over the other way so that she wouldn't fall into the deep side of that side of the rock. The other side was the shoal side. So she fell over on the starboard side and stove a couple of planks in on the starboard side. First one side, then the other side. Well, by gee, then finally they got her off and they got her out. But that didn't dissuade McMillan. He turned right around and went to another harbor the next year, wintered in all different places, both in the Labrador, both in the 26 times he did it. 26 times he went north with these kind of wonderful men, these kind of scientists, and they studied the north and studied all the features they could over and over again. 26 times in untamed territory, no charts, and all just barren. Seemed like wasteland, but it really wasn't wasteland. It was just absolutely part of the earth, the way the earth was formed. They certainly learned a tremendous amount about it all. Springtime, when the ice would melt and the snow would melt from around the vessel, they would get so excited and they would be coming back again. They had to be very careful, find a proper lead through the ice where they could get that vessel going, and so on. 26 voyages above. And finally, by the time 1950s came, the poor old vessel, she had been through so much, the rust bleeding down the side of her. She had served so many, many years and done so much hardship. McMillan decided, he's in his 80s, decided it was time that he would throw back a little bit and cease and desist the trips to the north. He made his last trip in 1953 and decided after that the vessel must be preserved some way for posterity. So he and Miriam got together and they decided they would give the vessel to the Mystic Seaport Museum, Mystic Museum down there in Connecticut. Wonderful museum, fantastic vessels in the Mystic Seaport Museum. They accepted the vessel, a lot of hoopla, oh, fireworks and everything else, and they lay her there at Mystic Seaport Museum. 10 years she languished there, and they had no interest in the boat. 10 years, she's an elderly boat now. 10 years without any maintenance. 10 years she lay with the ravages of the weather going into her decks and down into her seams. And the poor old thing, my God, she got in such terrible condition. Finally, one of the visitors, a woman, stepped her high heel down through one of the planking down on the foredeck there. It had gotten so rotten. They then, in their infinite wisdom, they closed the vessel. They wouldn't allow any more visitation. And then they decided they would take it apart. They took the masts out. They took the windlass off. They took the engine out and put it on the beach. They picked all the hardware, every piece of hardware, anchors and chain, everything that was iron off of that. Why would they do that? They're going to sink it and sell all the goodness. McMillan's 95 years old, living in Provincetown. He and Miriam beside themselves with anxiety. My God, how could this be? And they made it public. They said it was a terrible black eye for Mystic, and I feel for them, but that was a calamity. They made it public that if they could get the boat away from Mystic, they would try and find a new home for it. I called him up in 1967. I said, Mac, I have a dock here in Maine. He says, oh my God, Jim. He said, take her to Maine, take her to Maine, see what you can do with it. He gave me the boat. Oh my God, now what? So I got a hold of the Magnum, uh, my friend down there with Booth Bay Harbor party boat, and he said that he would tow her from Mystic up to my dock in Maine. So we put the mast. They had broken the mainmast in half. They picked it up by the masthead, I guess, and broke it in half. And we put the pieces of the mast aboard, just threw everything we could get off the beach. Everything was there. I picked the engine up off the beach and we put it down on our beds down there. And I said, maybe someday I'll be able to get it back running again. But anyway, took everything we could and took it all to Maine and tied it up to my dock in Camden. There's where she looked that first summer that I had her at my dock in Camden. The bulwark all rotting off of her, the rails rotting off her. The whole foredeck was in terrible condition. And we let her dry out there. I took some plank off the side of her so that she would dry out and keep the weather off of it. And she came up out of the water just that one summer, 2 inches by drying out her frames and inside of her. So anyway, the Bowdoin came home. We put her up in the slipway. She hadn't been hauled out of the water in a dozen years. We put her on the beach there and did her bottom, the enormous barnacles off of the bottom of her. And we tore the whole foredeck off of her. You can see in the lower picture there. And we put new foredeck on her. There you can see up around the fore. We put new top timbers over on that port side. That seemed to be the worst side of her at the time. And put a cover over her. First time she'd been covered in a long time. And took some plank off. We had to take a sprinkling of plank off of her. And gussied her up as the best we could, put her back together again. I didn't have any money. I had to make a new mainmast, so I went up to Donkey Deadwater, northern part of Maine, got a 185-year-old black spruce, brought it down in the old-fashioned way. We made a new mainmast for her. First you 8-sided, then you 16-sided, then you 32-sided, then you 64-sided, then you're playing the old thing round. They say that once you get to that point, any damn fool can plane it round. We, the damn fools, planed it round, and we built that mast and put it back on the vessel. And there's the old ice barrel, the one I made for her, the ice barrel that had come originally with her, had the initials of the men carved in it, the men that sat in that thing and looked for leads in the ice. So I said, that's an artifact. We got to keep that. I built a new one and put it on the vessel. Got the mast in her. We gussied her up, fixed her up. We put plywood patches over the holes in her topsides here and there. We're driving hard now to go down and salute McMillan. He's 96 years old, living in Provincetown, wondering what's happened to his vessel. Well, I got a new pipe full of tobacco there, and we set out. We went down first to Wiscasset, where she sailed from on her original trip, and we left Wiscasset and sailed down to Boston, headed for P-Town. We got into Boston, and oh my God, the newspapers found out about it, and and they broadcasted that Bowdoin was coming. Bowdoin was coming, so we heard 300 people was coming down on the wharf down there. Well, we got up in the morning, and sure enough, getting ready to sail down there, and we looked out and dungeon thick of fog. I wouldn't believe it. Oh my God, couldn't see a thing. We didn't have any electronics. All we had was a lead line and a compass that hadn't even been swung. But we had to go. We had all those people waiting for us. So we left Boston in the thick fog. We sailed all through the middle part of the day through the thick fog. Didn't know where we were. Weren't even sure where McMillan's house was. But I was headed for the beach down there, Cape Cod Beach. And we ran our time out. So, of course, we got the lead out and we started sounding. And we sounded it by the Mark 20, by deep 18, 16, and the bottom kept coming up and coming up. And I said, all right, guys, it's like a fog. We can't see anything. We got to go to the pier now and be prepared to jibe over. Because as soon as it starts to shoal too much, we're going to jibe. I heard the leadsman shout out 3 fathom. And I said, oh my God, here we go. So we jibed over and we headed for the dock. And just about that time, the wind came a little more abeam and she kind of leapt ahead a little bit. And I swear it was God given. We fell into a hole in fog, a clear hole in the fog. And my bow watch looked up and he said, hey, there's McMillan's house. And there was McMillan standing on his porch, ringing his bell. He could hear our horn. He knew we were coming. And he was ringing his bell, trying to tell us we are getting close. We are getting close. My God, we could see him. He could see us. We sailed through that little hole in the fog and went over and we tied up at the wharf. 300 people on the wharf welcoming us, wanting to come down on board the vessel. Oh my God. I said, we can't have everybody come aboard, but that's what they wanted to do. McMillan came down, regaled us with tales of the Arctic. We went to his house that night, saw movies of the Bowdoin in the Arctic. It was a wonderful, sentimental journey. Back to Maine. Afterwards, we spent 2 more years on the Bowdoin, fixing her up, gussing her up, and getting her ready for the windjammer business. My wife and I would sail her in the spring and fall, sail the Adventure in the middle of the summer, make some money so that we had some money to put into the Bowdoin and go and have fun on it in the spring and in the fall. We would frequently sail her quite late um, with snow, way well past Thanksgiving in the fall, all over Cape Breton, all over Nova Scotia. Had a swell time. I took her further south than she'd ever been before. I took her to Cape Charles, the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay, and back again. Old Miriam McMillan was always worried that I was going to wreck her, but we had so much fun. I never babied her. We had very small crew. Most of the time, I had my mate John Nugent, and he took a great interest in the Bowdoin. And my wife and my 2 little sons, they were down below cooking. Just my mate and myself would sail the boat all day long, and then we'd anchor in some other little cove. It was a wonderful way. And she's a fabulous little boat to sail. Just small enough so that you think you have your own private yacht, and just gorgeous, full of mystique and so on. So anyway, time went on, and the Coast Guard finally shut me down. I was doing it under the Motorboat Act, which allows 6 passengers, only carried 6 passengers at a time. But that's on a vessel under 65 feet. Oh, I didn't know that. I'm very sorry. But anyway, we had to switch gears then, and the vessel then went out of my charge and went into outward bound and several other vicissitudes that were not favorable. But eventually, I understand a woman came along and bought the vessel and put up a pretty big stipend and donated it to the Maine Maritime Academy. What a great idea that was. Maine Maritime Academy took charge of that vessel. They took interest in the vessel, and it became a real entity for them. It was one of the only maritime academies in the country that had a sailing vessel that they could teach sailing. And here are some of the principals that were in charge of it at that time. The captain's there, and here she is, all gussied up, ready to take kids out. McMillan would be so proud to take cadets out on the old Bowdoin and take them to sea, take them up to Labrador, take them through the Bay of Fundy. And I can tell you some stories about the Bay of Fundy. And look at this little wave going by. Didn't really bother the Bowdoin, but it always makes me think. When I was talking to McMillan one time, I said, Mac, I said that the vessel's so lively, it shakes you all up. He said to me, "Oh yeah, it'll shake you up. It'll make your bones hurt. It'll just tear you all to pieces, but it'll always bring you home. The old Bowden will always bring you home." So home we came, back to the Maine Maritime Academy, and there they are, with a bone in her teeth. She is hopping right along there. So we got to conclude this part of it. We'll say goodbye to the McMillan part of the Bowden. I'm just so anxious to get Alec up here, but we got a couple more things to do. Let's back up a little bit here, and we'll go to quickly Illicet. Illicet. That's where the Bowden is headed, and this is a beautiful day of the harbor in Illicet. And look at all those icebergs. My God, how do you maneuver a vessel around in there? I would think that would be almost impossible. But what happens if you have bad weather? Here's a beautiful day. Oh my God, this went too fast. What happened here? There we go. This is the day that Allie came up. This is the day. Looking from up the hotel, I think Andy Chase took this picture. I looked at that and I said, Alec, weren't you afraid of that great island right alongside you? They said that wasn't an island, that's an iceberg. An iceberg in the middle of the harbor must be grounded out there. Disco Island is just beyond. And you can see just in front of that iceberg, there are two little masts sticking up out of the fog. And that's the Bowden arriving. Can you imagine what his radar screen looked like? Well, you may even see it. But that was that day. Now, I want I want to relieve this. I want to go on, but I got to blow the fog away and tell you a little bit about the Royal Fairness Sail Power Steam Museum. We're going to shorten it up just as much as we can. But what is a good commercial if we don't do it over and over again? You got to see it so many times that you're sick of it before you really it impresses you. This is the old museum building right there, and up on the upper left, of course, we have right solid full of memorabilia. We've got incredible things in there. Nathaniel Bowditch's backstaff engraved to him, his astrolabe. Nathaniel Bowditch, the father of navigation, all over the world. Every student of navigation, they know the name of Nathaniel Bowditch. We have his original equipment. We have a wonderful exhibit on the Bowden, of course. We've got a steam engine room there with 12 running steam engines and so on. Over on the right, we decided the ambiance in the parking lot should be improved. So we got a schooner. We stuck it out in the parking lot, dug a hole and stuck it in there. Down below it, you see our new building. The new building, we completed it a couple of years ago, and we filled it up now. We've got a beautiful big steam launch in there. We've got the vessel, the light horseman that discovered Penobscot Bay in 1605. And we've got a number of other little vessels. Fantastic, beautiful big vessel, and lots of bathrooms. That's an important thing in a museum. And over in the lower left, this is what we dwell on, the vessels that were built in the Snow shipyard. We're going to do it in a couple of weeks. We're going to do a program on the Snow shipyard. Look at the frames on that vessel, a big four-masted cargo schooner, workaday kind of schooner. They built them, but not all. They built so many of these great big vessels. This four-master, they built dozens of them. Took a whole forest to frame that boat out. Well, anyway, moving along, one of the things that I always tell everybody about is our skiff program, SKF, Sail Kids for Free, SKFF. And this is all sponsored by your donations and by your help. We take these kids, 8 to 14 years old, and we put them in a boat. They've never been in a boat before. They don't know what mainsail. They don't know a rudder from centerboard. And we teach them. We give them a whole week-long sailing class for free, sponsored by you, me, and everybody else around. Last year, we graduated 145 kids. The year before, 150 kids. The year before that, almost 150 kids. And that's what we're doing. These kids come out of there. The second day, they get the idea of it, how it goes. The third day, they're turning the boats over, bailing them out. The fourth day, they're really selling. The fifth day, down at the bottom, they're racing each other out around the buoys, and they become professional sailors in a week's time. It's a great thing for kids. Let them do it. My God, they get addicted to sailing and they won't be able to afford or have any time for drugs. We also do adult sales. We see those two beautiful little vessels up in the middle. Friendship sloop. We have two of those friendship sloops. Gorgeous little vessel. And the Harrishoff 12 and a half. We have two of those also. 1920s Harrishoff 12 and a half. Wonderful little vessels. And we teach, we get people who have some experience. We hone their experience. We teach them the finer points. We have a classroom in the wintertime. We teach them over in the upper left. We have our Sunday jam every Sunday for 15 years. We've had a Sunday jam year round. People come and bring their instruments and sing sea chanties and all kinds of other things, and so on and so forth. Down in the center is the Morning in Maine. She's a vessel that the museum has owned and put a man in and set him up in business, and he takes people on 2 hour sails in Rockland Harbor. You get 3 lighthouses and a view of Penobscot Bay, and it's a great thing to do. Down in the bottom, we do lobster bakes with our tent, our big tent, and we do the cruise ships in the summertime. And it's also available for weddings, for any kind of parties that you may want to do. Get in touch with us and we'll fix you up with that. Last thing I don't want to say is thank you. Thank you so much. We couldn't do any of this without you. We certainly honor and solicit donations whenever we can. And volunteers, come and volunteer with us and help put these programs, help teach these kids, and be a big benefit to the community. We're doing all we can to do that. Now, let's get on with it. Captain Alec, I hope you're there. I'm getting awful tired of my old voice.
All right, I'll take the mic there, Jim. Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here, taking the time out of your evening. And I hope to tell a good story and bring you right back to the deck of Bowdoin and a cold place. As you can see, and you've just heard from Jim, we're just the tip of the iceberg here. Tremendous history. And I'm lucky enough to be involved with carrying that legacy on. And that legacy is as far back as 1921. And we look forward to continuing that on for as long as we possibly can. So we just finished going to the Arctic for the 4th time under Maine Maritime Academy's umbrella. So it's a big feat and it's a big accomplishment. And I'm standing on the shoulders of many previous captains and a lot of history. And you saw the list of captains. They paved the road. What do you do to make a voyage like this happen? Well, you got the right boat, you got the right crew, you got the right shore support, and you deal with the weather and everything else as it comes. But those are the most important parts. So I want to give you something kind of fun here. Just going to give you a little video to get this going, and then I'll come back in. But just enjoy a little bit of this video of us coming out of the ice field and approaching Ilulissat after the fog is cleared.
Beaver?
Something's not right. Can't hear him. We shouldn't be up there.
Well, that's a little bit of a taste, but that was about 4 hours of that. And a lot of it was in the fog, and a lot of it was cameras away. So there you are, there you have it. That's a little bit of a taste. And that was a really good moment because that's when we felt like we were first in good water and free of the thickest parts of the ice. But anyways, going forward, just a little bit about the trip. Oop, hold on. There we go. That's actually us and Nook, our first stop in Greenland. I'm 2 years into Maine Maritime Academy and my involvement with the Bowdoin. My first year, we went up to Labrador. We were in the ice, and that was my first taste and experience of being in the ice. And I tell you, I wouldn't have been able to pull off this voyage as captain if I didn't have that experience. So that very much was part of laying the groundwork and the planning for getting Bowdoin back to the Arctic. And that's just a small piece of the amount of planning and hours many people, including myself, put into making this trip happen. We had 16 total people on board, 6 of which were professional crew, 10 students, and a mix of students. These are mostly of the vessel operations and technology and small vessel operations majors, but we had a mix of majors from engineering to business logistics and international business and logistics, ocean studies, and marine biology. So we really had a nice diverse a showing of Maine Maritime's offerings, and that was really great because we got to see a lot of student-led projects. We got to see a lot of collaboration with different expertise, and that was on the student level. We had, like I said, 6 crew, so captain, 3 mates, cook, and we had engineer. The engineer actually was a daemon. We wanted to keep somebody on ice, is what we called that. So if somebody fell ill or couldn't stand a watch, we would call that engineer to fill in. But let's keep this going here. So this is our route. Route selection was purely based on crossing the Arctic Circle and going to the same places that McMillan was going, of course, but also Captain Andy Chase, Captain Elliot Rappaport, and Captain Rick Miller. Rick Miller was the last captain that brought Bowdoin to the Arctic, and that was in 2008. So 16 years later, here we are. Pretty exciting. Our route took us straight from Maine, Boothbay, Maine, to St. John's, Newfoundland. That was about 7-day stretch. And then from there, we waited for our weather window and we headed on up to make the major crossing to Greenland. And you can see in our track, we hugged the coast pretty far, and that was to stay clear of Iceberg Alley, where a lot of the major icebergs from Greenland end up collecting at the beginning to the end of the summer season. So we stayed up the coast. We got up to Labrador, and we still had about 6 hours of nighttime, and being in the dark amongst ice is not a fun feeling or a safe one. So we planned this very carefully to make the fastest and narrowest passage through the ice field before we are in the middle of the Labrador Sea, going into the Davis Strait that was relatively ice clear. And that was a 10-day passage. Actually, we did it 9 days. It was about a 9-day passage to Nook, which was our first stop. You can see there that lowest point in Greenland on the track line there. So again, back to the student involvement. This is a few of our students, the marine biology student, ocean studies students that were measuring out. I think this was just under 900 feet, maybe 900 feet of line that we use to cast a CTD scanner. So what that does is it's continuity, temperature, and depth. And we are collecting data for salinity, the temperature, and at the different depths to see what those different water columns are salinity wise and temperature. And all this data is collected, one for their own study and our own research, but hopefully at one point we're going to overlay this to what McMillan was finding. Obviously he wasn't deploying anything that far, but it's more data to create a timeline with. So we're quite excited to keep researching that data. Just going into shipyard, a lot of work goes into getting the boat ready, and that starts with shipyard, pulling the vessel out of the water, inspecting the hull, painting, and making sure the prop is okay. That's a max prop. There are a lot of moving parts. They are very robust, but there are moving parts, and that's something that's not to be taken lightly when going into the ice. Fun little side story. Captain Andy Chase and I did go and track down Bowdoin's old prop just to know it existed, and got an agreement that if we did end up in trouble in Greenland, that we could get that put on a pallet and sent our way. So a little bit of a contingency plan that we definitely would not have wanted to test, but that's just part of the details that go into these voyages. Let's see here. First days at sea, of course, getting acclimated, a little green in the gills there. Nothing strange about that, very normal. That's leaving Booth Bay, headed to Newfoundland. There's a lot of current, a lot of varying depths. Going to Newfoundland, crossing Lorraine Trench, and what that makes for is a washing machine of a sea state. Doesn't have to be big, but it's certainly a washing machine. This is us leaving St. John, and the reason I have a picture of us leaving St. John, not going in, because when we arrived in St. John, this is not my first time there. It's a narrow gap. You can see that cut behind us, but it was nothing but fog, and all you could see was the glow of the breakers on either side. Pretty intimidating, but thanks to radar and good bow lookouts, we did just fine. But that's us headed for Greenland. Nice shot of her wing on wing under sail. We did that for probably about 10 or 12 hours. First iceberg off the Labrador coast. So now things are getting serious. Beautiful sunsets, but ominous. And we skip 8.5 days later to the coast of Greenland. There's our first sight of it. And yeah, you could see these mountains. I think we started seeing them close to 40 to 50 nautical miles offshore. You're looking at about 4,000 foot mountains right there. So, pretty large, and they come right down to the water. So this is going into Nuuk, the largest city in Greenland. And by the way, Greenland's population is just under 60,000 people. I used to live on the island of Bermuda, and that was the same population. So a little bit of context there. So this is more of the historic side of Nuuk, these older homes. There's a museum on this side of, a great maritime museum. On this side of I'll call it a city, large town. Modern day look at Nuuk. These are a lot of apartments and government housing. They really don't tear anything down. They just build new behind it, because everything that they take out of Greenland goes right back to Denmark. A lot goes into getting scrap out. the 24-hour sun. This is 2:18 a.m. and this is just as bright as it is before the sun starts to set. So that's as dark as it gets, and the sun starts going up again. This is an iceberg that, and I will give the disclaimer that it is very hard to get scale, especially when you're up there and you're standing on the deck of boat. And it's very hard to get scale of things, and you would need another vessel or some kind of object, which there are very few of, in front of these cliffs and icebergs to really get an appreciation for their size. But that iceberg is probably the size of a Walmart supercenter, and not any smaller than that. And there are plenty of these in Disco Bay, the ice capital of the world, which we are now getting close to. Getting towards Disco Bay, and something we knew about before we even left Maine was this: going into Disco Bay, again, the ice capital of the world, with the fastest producing glaciers. We knew that we were going in on a full moon, which also coincided with the solstice. We entered Disco Bay June 21st, and that was a strawberry moon. Happens every 19 to 20 years or so. So something worth noting. That was pretty surreal. But with that, the full moon, and the reason we want to know about that is because that's going to put way more ice than you would typically have out into the water, as icebergs that are aground are lifted from their grounding, and also you're discharging all that ice on the face of these already calving icebergs. So we certainly did not have a lack of ice, and we will get into that. There's the radar. That's what it looked like fairly often. That's at 0.25 nautical miles, so 1,200 foot range around there. You can take note of our speed. We're only doing a knot, and that seemed very fast at times. And it's a lot of clutch in and clutch out, because you don't want to hit any of these harder than concrete floating objects. And we were in fog a lot of the time going into Disco Bay. So very careful approach. You can imagine the amount of sleep I had personally. But a nice clear sky, really getting a first taste of. I kept promising the crew, don't worry, you don't need to wish for ice. We're going to see ice. You're going to be in the ice, and there's no backpedaling when we're there. So trust in the ice. Trust in you'll see the ice. And this is really after the fog lifted, and you're not seeing it up close. Now you can see the vastness of it. So just a very surreal feeling. And this is when everybody started to wake up to the fact that we are in fact in the Arctic, and we are in fact now navigating in the ice. Kind of I would say, an eerie, ominous scene. Icebergs kind of glow in the fog, which is, silver lining. There's Tom, our engineer, who is ready to combat any piece of ice that starts to head towards the propeller or the rudder. Bowdoin is capable of it, these sharp maneuverable turns, but you really don't want to be making any kind of turns like that, because you don't want to expose the sensitive bits, the rudder and the prop, to the ice. So you're really trying to plan far in advance with what kind of route you're going to take. And that is changing with the movement of the ice. Okay, what do we got? We got a Lulasat in the background. You can see the oil tanks. That's our first set of a Lulasat. And just over here where my cursor is, just to the south of Lulasat's the Alusa Glacier, where a lot of this ice is coming from. I threw this in there because it's actually kind of, well, you can see we left some bottom paint on that piece. An example of seasonal ice. This is leftover seasonal ice that happens during the winter freeze up, but this has lasted, and it's pretty soft compared to the glacial ice, which is very hard. But we pushed this out of the way, no problem. You know, it was very much just a pan. That's the narrow little cut into Ilulissat, but kind of a warm feeling at the same time. Threw this in there. Let's see. Ooh, I can zoom. There we go. Kind of introducing a new aspect of our voyage. We partnered up with a vessel called Arctic Earth. And if you can't tell by its name, it's a boat that spends a lot of time in cold regions, in high latitudes, north and south. Kind of a little backstory, and I know, Andy, you're out there, so hopefully I get this right, but a gentleman of David Conover, who is the owner of Compass Light Productions. They do a lot of environmental type documentaries. But anyways, way back, he was a student under Captain Andy Chase on, I believe it was SCA, but it was a student nonetheless. And I think it was only a few years ago, 4 years ago maybe, that they found themselves on a chairlift together skiing, and they didn't know it, but they reconvened, and the topics of the Arctic came up, and the idea of partnering up with another vessel that could also document Bowdoin and the student experience in the ice came up, and that's what we did. So we met up with them in Ilulissat, and we spent the next, I think it was planned 4 days, but it was actually 6 days we spent with them. And I want to say this really expanded our whole experience. Not only were we being able to see Bowdoin from a different perspective, but we were able to have Andy up there as well. But we were able to go to places I couldn't have planned on going, not having been there before. And this includes uncharted waters. It's nice having a smaller vessel that draws a lot less, that can go ahead and call back depths. So we got to do some real actual exploring, and that was incredibly special, and included actually naming different bays. So that was incredible. And we went further into fjords than we would have thought. Found some amazing anchorages, some abandoned villages, and seeing whales in fjords is quite the combination, I have to say. So that was a plus. That was a great experience, and it gave me more confidence navigating in the ice as well, having Arctic Earth there. And a lot of incredible footage was captured that you will see in the future. But I don't know. Andy might have claimed the trophy for footage on this one. This was taken from on top of the hotel roof in Ilulissat through, you know, those large tourist binoculars that typically take quarters. Well, I don't think this one did, but he was able to capture this through the binoculars, and boy, it just takes you way back. If it wasn't for that radar, you'd think this was Macmillan, and that's us coming through. And very thick, you can see, but believe it or not, this is when we felt like we could freely navigate through the ice. That was a good feeling. Now they're seen off in the distance in the background there. That's Disco Island. Creepy sight. These are common Inuit gravesite, and they're very shallow graves. The Greenlandic sled dog, a really incredible dog. They are purebred. You will only find them in Greenland, and you will only find them north of Sisimiut, north of Ilulissat. North of Sisimiut and in Ilulissat on up, but you will not even find these dogs in Nook. No other species of dog is allowed north of Nook, and these dogs are not allowed out either. I don't know how well that is controlled, but it is a very important, you know, it's very important that they keep this purebred. You know, they are chained up all summer long and they pull sled in the winter months. The puppies roam freely, but they're mostly pets now. You will find in the northern villages that they are still used more as, you know, commercial type purposes, but or getting around transportation. But they're kind of turning into more of a pet. I thought this was a funny one. This is our chief mate, David Stoles. He's pleading with the ice gods to take it easy on us as we go even further north. This is the vastness of the landscape. Backing up to our passage, you know, we had a lot of experienced crew, some of them captains in previous lives themselves and have been on the water for a very long time, some of them longer than myself. And we all kind of noted we had never been on a passage where we didn't see another vessel for more than a week. And we didn't see another vessel for, you know, 7 to 8 days. So really isolating feeling. I like this one. You can see Arctic Earth. We're at Anchorage there and the snow-covered mountains in the background. This was a waterfall. There are a lot of waterfalls up there, but this was funny because we were motoring along and I said to the mate, I said, "Where's Arctic Earth?" And he said, "Oh, they're over by that waterfall." I'm like, "No, they're not." And he's like, "Yeah, they are. Look at, they're a speck." So I put this yellow arrow. You can see Arctic Earth there, and that there gives you some scale to my previous point. Catching fish by hand. Wow, a skill that is still practiced apparently. These are capelin, and we did eat a fair share. Our third mate, Graham, he fried some up, made a nice remoulade, and we even transported some via small boat over to Arctic Earth, and they were a great hit. Now, speaking of Graham, that's him holding the helm. We actually had it lashed at this point with the engine clutch ahead. And both anchors with 3.5 shots out in about 50 feet of water. Why? Well, you can see the turbulent water around. This was our first experience, actually really our only experience with the katabatic winds. They are called locally the foehn winds, and they are hard to predict, more frequent in the winter, but they do happen, especially further up the fjords because of that cold ice cap. That is most of Greenland, 80%, over 80% of Greenland. You get cold, dense air that drops down, pushing warm air ahead of it. Usually brought on by some kind of low pressure system moving up the coast, but it doesn't take much and can be very localized phenomenon. So we quickly got our second anchor down. We have very heavy chain. I knew we were going to hold. That wasn't my biggest concern. My biggest concern were the 2 icebergs that did not blow out of the area that were aground ahead of us, hoping and fingers crossed that those weren't going to let go and start bearing down on us. With 1 anchor down, it's somewhat easy to kind of motor and pivot on your anchor, but with 2 down, we were kind of sitting ducks in that regard. Of course, Arctic Earth was still in company, so we were in close communication. That night before, Captain Magnus at Arctic Earth and myself were awake most of the night, just waiting for any kind of wind shift or ice bearing down on us. And we had a nice little after breakfast activity, weathering the foehn winds. Silver lining to that, it blew all the ice out of the area. It blew all this ice that was blocking our way to the face of the glacier. So we took full advantage of that. That's the face of the glacier I'm talking about. And it almost looked like steps going up. You can see that's the top of it there. And there were different ledges. We did break out the sextant. I don't know how accurate we are, but we judged basically between 600 and 900 feet was the height of the face of that glacier. We talked about not beating ourselves up getting there. Well, things went on and we just kept going until we were right there and could witness it. And what I mean by that is we pushed through this brash ice for maybe 2 hours or so, could have been 3, like a slushy, just pushing through. I haven't seen anything pop up in the chat other than I know there's things popping up. We will get to questions, so don't worry. Getting closer to the glacier face. At this point, we started hearing thunderous roars, but obviously, looking at the sky, there's no thunderstorms in sight. What that was the glacier calving, and not major pieces. Actually, it looked like crumbs falling off the face of it, but it was casting this thunderous roar that was quite spectacular. And every now and then, a large piece would fall and cause a, I don't know, 4 to 5 foot oily swell, which was kind of a little nerve-wracking, bouncing around like that amongst the ice. Both boats, Arctic Earth and Bowdoin, we just stuffed it right up into this brash ice, shut the engine off, no anchor down, and we sat there for another 3 hours, just mesmerized by this gigantic wall of ice that is ever so slowly moving and casting piece after piece into the water. And sometimes the noises, the thunders were so loud, it kind of made the feeling of we need to get out of here. There's our little LL Bean plug. That's our Bowdoin LL Bean jackets there, and at the glacier face, we got crew and students. That's our cook, Kimberly. Everybody likes a good arch somewhere else in Disco Bay. At this point, we were kind of abandoned all efforts of going further and further north. We just wanted to explore. So this is getting back into our continuation of getting to further northern latitudes, which I'll get to. And you can see this. This is all this track in here. That was all the exploring in the fjords we did going up to the glacier. And now we're heading to Sakak. And just next to Sakak is a cairn that Andy Chase's voyage in '91 they built, and we really wanted to go find that. Now we had about 30 knots of wind behind us. Kind of felt like we were starting to end up on a lee shore that was full of ice, and we were amongst the ice. So we hit latitude 70 and decided to make the call to end our northern route there and turn around. It was like anything, a hard decision, but the right one. Didn't take much thought. It was just the right thing to do. And we really wanted to go up through here and further around and reach 71, but that'll have to wait till the next time. This is actually on the island of Disco. We went into port, and the Danish royal family was there. They were making a tour. They actually had a small warship following them in company. This is how you get stuff around, but you gotta wait for the snow. But look at these massive volcanic mountains in the background, just crazy. And then you go to the beach and it's all volcanic sand, and the color of the water, you think you were in the tropics until you see icebergs in the background. Remnants of the past. These are Danish fishing boats, and a lot of pleasure boats even. Everybody has a boat up there. It's how they get around. It's of course how they hunt seal, which is it's a daily operation. Of course, the puppies. Judging by this picture, which I did not take, and instructions to not get near the dogs or pet the dogs, we got this great picture, but I have a feeling some of our students might have gone in for a pet. The larger dogs that you worry about, some of them, they are aggressive, and some of them do have rabies. This is Sisimiut. This was my favorite stop. This is, we passed Sisimiut going to Disco Bay. So this was going back south now down the coast before making our departure back to Canadian waters. A big population of young Danish students. There's a little satellite college campus there. A lot of them are geological studies, and just a cute town. A lot of houses kind of built on the rock faces, on pilings and stilts, and just had a lot of charm to it compared to some of the other places. But small. There is an airport across the way. And this is actually the port we pulled up, I think 3 cod on 1 jig at one point, and wolffish and 1 herring, flounder, and they're all living in harmony down there, but they're plentiful. That was a lot of fun. But just an example how even with such an adventure, the students are always learning. This is the engineer teaching 2 of our power and engine majors something about head pressure. That's over my head, but it's what they were doing. And of course, I have to plug in for Battle Harbor. This is one of my favorite places I've ever been. It is on the southernmost tip of the eastern coast of Labrador. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also where Perry and McMillan, as previously mentioned by Captain Sharp, made the first transmission that they had reached the North Pole from, and they made it from this little shack over here, and it's very cool. And people can actually stay here, pay to stay here in these cottages. They have a lovely little pub, kind of reminiscent of a ski lodge, and of course Bowdoin in the background. But this is just a beautiful, serene spot. And one that I would like to frequent every year if we can. It seems like it's in reach after going to Greenland. Actually, the previous year we stopped here and we saw an Arctic fox, and it was shedding its winter coat still. And I think one of the crew members got a chunk of that fur. Our arrival back. Just wanted to show you this because the students are still smiling. So if that's any indication of how the trip went, there you have it. Let's see, does that end it? We got a little more video here. Sure, we can play it. You're hearing Graham at the bow talking to me on the quarterdeck, and Connor is up in the ice barrel, thanks to Captain Sharp. I think we just came to a stop there. So there you have it. There are, of course, hundreds of photos from that trip that you will see come out in various other capacities, and we have a lot of other talks planned, of course. So thank you for letting me warm up with you all this evening. I'm sure I missed stuff that I wanted to talk about, but hopefully that'll come out in the questions. And I'm trying to open up the chat. I don't know, Robin, do you want to come in at this point, or should we just go right into questions?
Yeah, sure. Anybody want to ask questions? Or Andy, if you have anything to add, you've certainly been there a lot, or Jim.
How about a round of applause for Alex Peacock? Wonderful, wonderful
Thank
today.
you. Okay, I want to go back to one question here. Something about geography. I might go back a couple slides to the map here if I can. Robin, can you see the questions? Maybe you want to cherry pick some
Yes, somebody was, there weren't all that many. Somebody was asking, the map you showed going up to Greenland. They were a little
Yeah.
confused, but,
Sure.
just on what the lines were and where you were going.
Yep. Sorry to rewind here.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are. So we carried what's called an iridium tracker. It works with the iridium satellite network, and what that means is it works all over the world. So we carry one of those. So we are constantly transmitting and could be seen via app. But this is the
Andy,
track.
maybe if you use your pointer, yeah.
Yeah,
Good.
this is the track we left. So actually, this this also includes the rest of our summer here a little bit too. But of course, down here at my pointer, leaving our official departure port was Booth Bay. We did that because historically McMillan left from Booth Bay, if not Wiscasset. We went south of Sable Island here. Again, I've been past this island. I don't know how many times, I can't count, but I've never seen it. It's always been foggy. Really beat the heck out of ourselves trying to get to Newfoundland. Had to do a leg here because of the sea state and wind. And then that's St. John's, Newfoundland, where my pointer is now. This, of course, being the island of Newfoundland. This is the Labrador coast. When I was talking about Battle Harbor, I was talking about right where my pointer is here. That's Battle Harbor.
Hang on, Alex, something's happened to your show. There we go. Okay,
Nope.
Sorry,
got
You
it.
see me?
there, sorry, Don, I don't know what happened. Don Plath, you just shared something. I just unshared it.
We're all good.
Okay. Okay. So then our first stop, this was Nook here. So south of that, there are some more communities and villages. But when you get into southern Greenland and onto the east coast of Greenland, is very tough with the ice. It doesn't clear till almost too late by the time you'd want to be coming back or leaving the Arctic. So any dreams of going to Iceland, which I do have, there'll be a careful study of this area. And there's actually a passage, Prince Christian Sound here, that you would want to go through. But going further north, this is Sisimiut. So that was our last port in Greenland before making our trip back south. This being Disco Bay up in here. Sisimiut, or sorry, Ilulissat is right there. And the fjords we were exploring it up here. As far as going north, I think Elliot Rappaport, who was mate on the 91 trip, but it took command, and well, he was in command the longest for 10 years about. In 94, he went up to, I think it was 71, 22 minutes north. So he kind of holds the, I guess, Maine Maritime record for furthest north. So we don't strive to beat any of those goals, but they're fun milestones to work towards. So that's, and of course, this is called Belle Isle Strait here. And right about at this point, when you start seeing ice. On the East Coast, you start to see it down here, but in Belle Isle Strait, you start to see it about there. And I mark all these points on the chart. I study the ice charts. About every other day they're posted, but you study them pretty closely. Overlay that on the forecasted wind directions, sea states, fog forecasts, all of that, and make your calls based on that. I think a lot of people thought we were going to bail out into Labrador, seeing us go so closely up the coast, but we are really just trying to get out of the iceberg zone. Basically, they give you a 60 nautical mile grid, so squares of 60 nautical mile by 60 nautical miles, and they give you an average of the amount of icebergs in those zones, and you steer clear of the ones that say 100, 120, and stick to the ones that say 50 or 60. And that's how you kind of draw your line to get through that path. And that's always a pretty nerve-wracking feeling. Again, going back to having 6 hours of dark until you're further north. But once you're clear of that area, everybody feels a lot better and can kind of breathe a little bit. The reason that these areas are ridden with ice, as I'm describing, is because you have what's called the West Greenland current. This is all stemming from the Beaufort Sea polar current that comes down from the North Pole, essentially. But it comes down the East Coast here, and it wraps around the southern tip, and it's carrying ice the whole way. And that ice comes up the coast. Some of it grounds off on the coastal areas. And then right about here, it arcs over. It does split and go further north still, but it makes a kind of a gyre here before it starts coming down and actually speeding up in the Labrador current here. And it moves quite quick, quite fast, 12 miles in 24 hours sometimes. And then ends up piling up in Newfoundland and, out in this area. A lot of ice ends up out in this region here. It just gets kicked out by the current, if not fetching up in Newfoundland. And that's why Newfoundland has such a tourism draw to go out in little boats and see the icebergs not far off the beach. Coming down from Cape Chidley, the northernmost part of Labrador, you get a lot of ice flows late into the summer coming down, which is what we experienced my first year going up. Okay.
Alex, John Worth is asking about future trips that you have coming up.
Yeah, great question. And thanks, Captain Worth, for actually sparking this whole event.
Yes.
Yeah, I really wanted to thank you for that. Captain Worth of Captain of Bowdoin in the 2008 time frame and for several years. But our future trips next year, I'm planning to go back to Newfoundland, and we're hoping to do the Bay Islands in this area here and some of the South Coast. You get St. Pierre, Miquelon, the French Islands. Really like to go get some pastries, maybe some purple juice to bring back. But you have the Bay of Islands, which, Captain Cook, he explored this whole area, and he named that the Bay Islands, similar to the Bay Islands in New Zealand that he explored. So mountains, fjords. And then as far as getting back to Greenland, that is the 2027 plan. I want to go back and go further. So more Arctic ventures in our future, and this is all part of keeping the legacy alive. Why do we go? Well, why not? It's very cool. It's a important region. It's one that I think for maritime students is very important, especially for the fact that they may end up on some other kind of vessel with some commercial agenda in their future, but now they can see it from the deck of the Bowdoin with an appreciation for stewardship of the environment and the community, have a whole nother appreciation that they can carry out into the future as this place gets further evolved with commercial traffic heading for the Northwest Passage and tourism. That's the big thing. New laws are coming into place every year because of the impact of cruise ships and tourism. And it's just a very vulnerable region. So we shall see. And hopefully we can be a part of educating and doing something good. We're not going there to offer anything. We're just purely going there to educate. And that's our mission.
Alex, well, a couple of questions are popping up now. One is about food prep, and I would imagine provisioning would go along with that, where you did that along the way. And then there's a couple more after that. So
yeah. What was it for food prep? Was that the first
yeah,
question?
for how you provisioned in food prep. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I leave that up to the cook. I just ask the question, do we have enough food? And do we have enough if we get stranded 5 days past our intended voyage? We carry a lot of backup reserve canned food. We just kind of pack the boat to the gills with canned food. We carried several coolers on deck so we could keep produce as long as we could. And you're not getting much produce past Nook. Did find the grocery store is quite quite good in Nook. But if we're planning on a 10-day passage, we're provisioning for 14 days. We just do that as a rule of thumb, make sure there's plenty of food. Of course, space is the limiting factor there. So it's a lot of dried food. And again, back to the coolers that we keep on deck with ice packs. And once you get up north, you don't have to worry about refrigeration. But yeah, of course, there's dietary restrictions that is a factor. And the cook really has to be a magician when it comes to keeping people happy and properly fed. So that is a very noble job. I think it's the hardest job on board. Of course, when something goes wrong, it doesn't fall on their shoulders, but it's still the hardest part of the job. And then we got to experiment with some fun foods once we were limited to the grocery stores in Greenland. Yeah, you can.
Another question from John Worth. He's handing us questions here. Has there been any talk of joining up with the Effie Morrissey?
I keep trying to lure them into all kinds of stuff with us, but we'll see once they get further grounded in their programming if they'll. Last year we went into Brigus, and Brigus, Newfoundland, is the home of Bob Bartlett. Effie Morrissey, for those that don't know, is another schooner that had a very famed Arctic exploration past history, including Bob Bartlett, who was the captain of the Roosevelt when Perry was going to the North Pole. But anyways, we went into Brigus, and we sent a post to Ernestina with us at Bob Bartlett's family dock saying, "Wish you were here." So we're trying to entice them to join us in collaboration, and boy, would it be a dream to go north with them and company. Except I'd feel bad with them with a bowsprit.
And a question on, do you ever coordinate with the Arctic Museum down at Bowdoin, the Perry McMillan Museum?
Yeah, we certainly do. Actually, that was kind of a prerequisite. Once our students were signed on, we all paid a visit to the museum. I was Susan Kaplan there and got to see that. There's ongoing collaboration. We are sifting through archives. Actually, Tom, our engineer on board, and I are planning a trip there soon to find more scientific based journals and archives to start overlaying and comparing with what we collected as far as eDNA and the CTD scans I mentioned.
And a final question I've got here. Another one's popped up. Did anybody do a cold plunge?
Yeah, not in the ocean, but we went ashore. There were some lakes, and yes, crew did a cold plunge. There is a blue nose ceremony done, but that is a coveted ceremony, but it does involve water. Nobody was harmed in the process.
A question, is there ice protection on her stem, and then any wildlife sightings? I know you talked about that earlier too.
Yeah, as far as protection, there's an iron band or a steel band that goes down the stem of the oak stem, and then the keel is 4 foot in keel is encapsulated by 3/4 inch steel, actually all original. But it's purely the reinforcement and the beefiness and construction of Bowdoin that is her protection against the ice. We don't have the double planked hardwood sheathing that McMillan had. That was about 2.5 feet above and below the water line. And if you think about where he was going and actually being frozen in during the winter, they really needed that. And he was known to ram ice, mostly in dire situations, but he was ramming it at times. But he had a better eye for what was old ice and what was new ice, what was softer versus hard. But that was the amount of protection we had. I remember last year at some points in the ice, we actually put coils of heavy dock line. We hung them down at the water line to help buffer ice a little bit, but no, nothing more than the stoutness of the vessel and that iron band on the forefoot and stem.
And wildlife sightings?
Uh, yeah, well, lot of whales, finbacks, humpbacks, pilot, I believe. Geez, Andy, do you remember seeing much for wildlife? I mean, no polar bears.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to see a polar bear in Bowdoin Harbor in Labrador. We saw a caribou in Labrador, but until we saw that polar bear, the entire trip, everybody told us there wasn't a chance in a million that we would see a polar bear. And a lot of whales, yeah. But we didn't get to see an Arctic fox. But yeah, we saw one caribou and one polar bear is what we got.
Yeah, and we saw more wildlife last year in Labrador, including caribou as well. The students could tell you more about the bird species we saw.
Well, that's it for questions in the chat. If you,
Yeah.
Andy, if you have anything to add, or Jim?
That sounded perfect to me. Can't wait to see you do it again.
I know, I'll be
From a
there.
nice
Trust
warm
me.
armchair.
Great program, Capt Peacock. Really, you've been an amazing steward of the boat, and it's really great to see it doing these great trips.
Here,
Thank
here.
you. Well, I have all your support, so that goes a long way. Thank you.
What a great presentation that was.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to backtrack a little bit here. On our captain's quarters, you'll see that January 12th, 2021, we did the Arctic Schooner Bowdoin. Some of these names, of course, you'll recognize right there. But we've done all of these different ones, all these different schooners, and lots of. Here, looking ahead in 24,
25.
25, that's right, 2000. Well, in 2024, we did these others. And in 2025 now, we've just completed Maine's first ship a couple of weeks ago, which I understand is up on YouTube now. And of course, this one on the Schooner Bowdoin, which is really a fantastic voyage and a wonderful thing. We have February 4, the Harbor Masters Roundtable. I yet to find out what that's all about. That's going to be conducted by Jen, one of our Harbor Committee people.
Program director.
Yes. And the old Snow Shipyard in February 18th, we're going to do a little synopsis of the old Snow Shipyard and tell about Rockland when it was the shipbuilding capital of the country at the time. Back in the late 1800s, 1891, 1892, and 3, Rockland was the 4th largest seaport in the United States. And all of it with these wonderful vessels that were built right there on the yard, the property on which we have the museum. Hallowed Grounds, March 4th, The Battle of Ink and Ice, Darrell Hartman's book, and March 18th, the author of Slocum's Wake, Nat Warren White. And that's what we have lined up for the Sail Power and Steam Museum Captain's Quarters. So thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Again, we couldn't do it without you. Donations encouraged and gratefully received. And join us, volunteer, join us. If there's any other questions, anybody else has something to say, jump in and speak up now. Open your mic up and jump in. Say your piece.
I want to
Otherwise,
do one shameless promotion of the Sail Power and Steam Museum. Is that you have one of the finest Arctic expeditions of Bowdoin's exploration, and it's really worth going to visit to see all the artifacts that you have from the Bowdoins being saved to the current trips and to all of the history of the Arctic exploration. So everybody should go check out that museum.
thank you, John. I was very fortunate. Donald McMillan gave me so many wonderful things that he had collected when he was on all 26 voyages. We have a narwhal tusk there. They say you can go to the narwhal tusk and touch it lightly and make a wish and it'll come true. I imagine that's as true as any of these wishful things. But anyway, we have a lot of other memorabilia from the Arctic that Macmillan has volunteered to give us when he heard we were going to try and lay the museum as lay the vessel as a museum back in those days. Thank you, John. Thank you, Andy, for coming. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alex. We look forward to
Thank
the
you,
next trip.
Alex.
Cheers.